Hello, everybody. Good morning, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay. Joining me this morning is Andrew Beasley, and we're going to start today by discussing something which I've just said to Andrew. I do actually hate myself for even putting on the agenda today, but we are going to talk about the Saudi interest in Mohamed Salah once again. I mean, the main reason we are going to speak about it is the details of the bid, or the supposed bid, were revealed by CBS yesterday. And what was it? I think it was 80 odd million upfront and a potential 40 odd million in add-ons as well, bringing it to somewhere in the region of 140 million pounds, I think it was. And I mean, starting with the upfront money, Andrew, I mean, 86 million pounds, there's what, 2-3 days left in the transfer window. There's just no chance, is there?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I think it's an interesting one to sort of just think, like, what if they'd have done this in June or something like that? You know, I think if they were offering this sort of money for Salah in June, then Liverpool would have had a very difficult decision to make, obviously. But I think, as you say, with the transfer window so near to closing, I can't imagine it's going to happen. But clearly that's there. You know, are they going to come back in January? Again, if Liverpool have a good start to the season, like we hope, they probably won't want to lose him mid-season. I think next summer there could be a big move for Salah, and then Liverpool really will have a decision to make when he's down to the final year of his contract. But I just can't see it happening this week. No, I think Liverpool would be, mad to accept it if they want to have anything approaching a good season, really.
Yeah, I want to focus on something you said there, because I wanted to ask you about if I think it's Al-Ittihad, the club that are coming in. If they had come in the first week of the transfer window, obviously I think it would be. I mean, just bearing in mind how much more time there would be in the transfer window, I think it would be slightly more up for debate, wouldn't it? But I mean, in my mind, even then, I think 86 million pounds up front, if that's all you'd have to spend in the window. I mean, I think I said this on my Twitter last night, that the list of players as good or better than him in his position is probably about 3 people long, isn't it? And are Liverpool going to be able to prize any of those people away from the clubs they're already at? It just feels like a bit of a non-starter ever since he signed that bumper contract a while back.
Yeah, like you say, there really aren't many players out there, and even if they are, you've then got to convince their clubs to sell. You've then got to match their financial things, and obviously Salah is Liverpool's top earner, so theoretically, if they sold him, that does open up space on the wage bill in that sense. But yeah, I mean, finding a replacement would not be easy. I mean, I think, very long term, no doubt they're hoping that Ben Doak is that player, but I mean, you can't pin it on him at this stage, clearly. So finding somebody who's as good to take that role is just really, really difficult. Liverpool have got a slightly strange front line in that they've got sort of 4 players who theoretically could play on the left, and then they've got Salah, who basically does all the work on the right. If they lost one of the guys on the left, you think, well, okay, that's not great, but there's cover on the left. But I mean, there's nobody who's shown they could cover from Salah within the squad. And as you say, replacements of that standard are very thin on the ground and very hard to acquire.
Yeah, I think one more thing on this. A lot of people that I've seen speaking about it or have spoken to about it, a lot of people thinking that this might be one that is a bit of a goer in 12 months' time when he's only got a year left on his contract. Liverpool might look to cash in. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you think he might want to carry on playing, in a European league, in a top 5 league, until sort of the latter stages of his 30s? He's still only 31. We've got to bear in mind.
Yeah, I suspect he will look at it that way because Saudi Arabia, the league there, is obviously is purchasing quite a lot of good players. There's no question about that. But clearly at this point, it's being viewed as something of a retirement league. You've got guys like Henderson, Fabinho there, who've been great players, but they're clearly going towards the end of their career. You look at someone like Mohamed Salah, I suspect he doesn't think he's anywhere near the end of his career. He probably thinks he's got maybe 5 years left at the top level. And even then he could do 2 or 3 years in Saudi and still be one of the best players there. Now, it may be that in that time frame, maybe not in a year like we're talking about for next summer, but like it may be in a few years' time, the Saudi league is a lot better and a lot more of a serious proposition. But I suspect that Salah would look at it as things stand and say, well, I'm just not getting the sort of standard of football. There's no real major achievement. If he went there and won the league, who really is sort of going to care? Probably, nobody really. I mean, I'm saying that from obviously our perspective. We've got to respect the fact that he's a huge hero in the sort of in the Arab world and stuff like that. So it's not as straightforward as me saying, I'm not interested in the league over there. Maybe he is, but yeah, I think Salah probably feels he's got a few years left at the very top of the game, and then maybe that's for after that. It may be that he sees out his Liverpool contract, that this year, next year. I mean, if he goes there on a free, I mean, who knows how much money they'll give him if he was going there on a free transfer and stuff like that. But yeah, my assumption would be he would look at that, and it's not the sort of sporting decision for him, however much money they offer in his direction. If he wants to become a real legend of the game, I think he is for the current time, but sort of an all-time legend. He's going to want to do more at the very top level.
Yeah. Do you think Liverpool are going to have a bit of a decision to make on that front in 12 months' time as well, then, assuming obviously that he doesn't go in this window? Do you think Liverpool are sort of going to have to be weighing up, how much do we value this? I mean, 20-odd goals, 10 assists in the season, but if they're only going to get one more year out of it and then he's going to go to Saudi Arabia for a free, do you think they might try and cash in on him next summer instead?
I definitely think they could if the money's right. I mean, a lot will depend on what happens this season, because obviously, we're talking this week and probably still buzzing from the Newcastle result on Sunday. We're all hoping that Darwin Núñez has an absolutely fantastic season. And, if he does, it might be at the end of this season, Núñez has scored sort of 25 goals, chipped in with a few assists. And they're like, if he's become the player that we hope he does, then they're like, well, we could probably stomach the loss of Salah a bit more easily. Darwin's got to prove that, obviously. I mean, I'm just using that as an example because obviously everyone's sort of quite high on Darwin Núñez at the moment, and understandably so. But the picture will change. Maybe Ben Doak comes in and plays all the games in the Europa League and scores 5 goals and gets 3 assists in the Europa League group stage, and he's looking a bit more of a safer bet than that. So I definitely think if this offer's on the table next year, and certainly a bit earlier in the transfer window, I think Liverpool will have a serious decision to make. And again, Salah may not want to go, and that's fine. But I think Liverpool would likely be more receptive to it, at least in a year's time.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be one to keep an eye on. But as you say, Liverpool expected to be more receptive to it in a year's time. Certainly not right now. So that's not one we're expecting to see happen. But as you say, we're all still buzzing from that Newcastle result. So we are going to move on to talk a bit about that game. Jarell Quansah obviously coming on. I think it was for Joel Matip, wasn't it? In around the 77th minute. I mean, Jurgen Klopp saying in his press conference that it wasn't due to any fitness concerns for Joel Matip, but I mean, that is always something to be concerned about with Matip. And obviously, Ibrahima Konate wasn't available because of a small injury. He'd picked up having had to play against Bournemouth with 10 men. And I mean, Quansah's really impressed, hasn't he, Andrew? A lot of people in some corners of Twitter and other online spaces suggesting that maybe Liverpool don't need to go into the market in the days that remain and buy a centre back, and that he might be the solution. But do you think we've not quite seen enough of him yet, Andrew?
Yeah, it's a bit premature to be making those sort of conclusions. Although he did look pretty good, and that's great. I mean, I think what we have to remember as well a lot of the time is that. I'm not saying that Liverpool shouldn't buy a centre-back, but at the same time, I think Jurgen Klopp has a lot more faith in his players than a lot of the fans do. Obviously, the fans remember the mistakes and things like that, and I'm sure he does as well. But, somebody like Quansah, he might think, Quansah can do a job for me this season, whereas the fans will be like, I'm not sure about that. And that's understandable. So I think Jurgen probably views this in a different way that we all do, and obviously that's his job. He's the manager and stuff like that. I mean, I do think as we're very much approaching the end of the window, I mean, it's not looking like Liverpool are going to sign a centre back. There's no sort of really strong rumours, unless they're going to sort of pull a rabbit out of a hat on Friday or something. Nothing looks on the cards at this point. So he's obviously, if that is the case, he's got to back Quansah, really. I mean, you'd imagine Quansah's going to potentially play, again, like Doak, sort of Europa League games and stuff like that. Klopp might be sort of true in what he's saying about having no concerns about Matip, but if Am I on? Has my internet gone down there, I think?
You're back, Andrew.
Sorry about that. I think my internet must have gone down.
That was me or you then.
Well, we're back anyway. Yeah, so like I was saying, I think, Quansah may have a part to play this season, basically, because it doesn't look like Liverpool are going to sign a centre-back. And obviously, Klopp thinks, well, Konate may be out next week. Van Dijk's going to be out next week. He was sort of protecting Matip, maybe not because he thinks Matip's going to get injured, but it's just that thing of, I really need Matip for the Villa game, so it's best not to take any chances. But I think it's looking like Liverpool aren't signing a centre-back, and so Quansah could well have a role to play.
Yeah, as you say, could have a role to play this season, maybe some Europa League appearances. But something you just touched on there was something I did want to finish on. Virgil van Dijk obviously will only miss, well, for now, will only be missing one game rather than 3 games because it wasn't violent conduct. But do you think there's any chance he might be finding himself getting another game as well, retrospectively, with what he's been caught on camera sort of saying to the officials with all these new rules about, they're not wanting people wasting time, they're not wanting people wanting to crack down on people abusing the officials. Do you think he might just get another game for that?
Well, it's a possibility. I mean, I haven't seen anything specific about it, but I mean, it didn't look great. But watching the game, he was giving them a bit of a mouthful. So I think it's a definite possibility. It will sort of be a bit of a, a sort of precedent, I suppose, because they're clearly trying to lay down the law with all this sort of stuff. I mean, when you look at the sort of red card stats from seasons past, there's always more in the first few weeks of the season. They're always trying to sort of set the tone and say, right, we're not going to take any nonsense. And obviously this year it's been ramped up because of the time wasting and the dissent and stuff like that. So it might be that, what he has said isn't the worst thing necessarily, but they're going to look to make an example out of somebody. And unfortunately, it turns out that it might be him. Now, after the Villa game, it's Wolves away. I mean, Liverpool had a real nightmare there last season, don't get me wrong. But clearly, if he were to miss that, I don't think that's such a disaster because obviously Wolves do struggle to score goals and stuff like that. So they won't want to go there without Van Dijk. Absolutely not. But, if he did miss that game as well, there are worse games that he could miss. Obviously, the lawmakers, disciplinary, aren't thinking about that and Liverpool's perspective and stuff like that. But I don't think it's the end of the world. And I think there is a chance, as I say, they could make something of an example of him to, again, try and lay down the law early in the season, as they often do.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about, early in the season, these precedents being set by referees. I mean, I think they narrowly avoided setting a very bad one if Alexis McAllister's red card had been upheld. Because, I mean, watching the Newcastle game, there were 3 or 4 challenges like, well, that's a red card if Alexis McAllister's was. But, rash challenges by attackers on defenders, it's the sort of tackle you see all the time, isn't it? But as you say, a lot of precedents being set, and hopefully Van Dijk doesn't find himself a victim of that for what he said to the referee, because, as you say, I think if that's now unacceptable, then a lot of people are going to find themselves on the end of extended bans after red cards, aren't they? But that is all we've got time for here on the Morning Bulletin this morning. So, Andrew, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.